A year and a half ago, I went back to a conference at NIATA, which is an organization that I belonged to for a number of years, and I was inactive while I was living in London for a while. So I went back for the first time after maybe 7 or 8 years to Stamford, Connecticut. I taught a workshop, I gave a talk, a program. So in deciding what the talk would be about, it would just basically cover my experience and my journey as a figurative artist, defined as dress figurative or the doll. When I read that poem, it's called The Spider, Emily Dickinson, and the first line is, "A spider sows at night." And so I just changed the A to The Spider Sows at Night, and that was the title of my talk. I thought Spider Sows at Night was just a perfect title. Yeah, absolutely. Most of the artists I know that work in this field work in very isolated, environments, usually in their studio, very often very late into the night or sometimes all night. Mm. So in this blog, the focus is on costume design and all of the elements that come into that, which I have explored and developed over a number of years. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. How does costume contribute to the character of the piece? Well, I would say I think the most important part in the early development of a character is the face and the facial expression. That determines, age, gender. Then when you get into the element of costume, I think before you begin, you have to consider where does your character live? What period of time do they live in? What is their social status in terms of the village or the tribe that they live in? And then where do they get their garments, their clothes from? I mean, if they live a more rural life or a tribal life, their clothing is more organic and coming from, the environment that they live in. If they live before the Industrial Revolution, they weave their own cloth and they make their own clothes. After the Industrial Revolution, if they have, the economic resources, they buy bolts of fabric and they make their own dresses or they make them at a dressmaker. And all of these sort of elements, come into the decisions that you make, the choices that you make about the way you represent the clothing that they wear. I mean, is this daily wear or is this special occasion? Are they upper echelon and aristocratic, or are they, farmers, and do they work with the soil? One of the things that I look at when I see figurative artists interpreting clothing, in everything that we wear, whatever the period of time is, there are always clues to who wore it, where they wore it, what it was used for, and how long they've had it. I mean, you have to almost think like a detective. Where have these garments been, and what are they made out of, and how are they made? Have they been hand washed for 15 years, and have the cuffs worn out as a result and not replaced because they don't have enough money? It's just a poverty thing. How do they get from point A to point B? Are they walking outside in the elements? Are they walking through the mud? They come back inside. Probably they might have, even if they've cleaned up their shoes, they'll have an element of stain and kind of things like that. In other words, the costume that you're making, you have to think about the lifestyle of the character that you're creating that lives in that costume, so that there are indications in the clothing that tell you where they've been, One of the interesting comments I've heard a few times when I've been to exhibitions and people are looking at a piece that I've done, they're examining the detail. They're looking at the detail. And that somehow fascinates them. And they'll say, you know, why did you do that? Or, you know, what does that mean? Blah, blah, blah. And there doesn't always have to be an answer. There might not be an answer. But one of the things that I always say in workshops is that once the piece is done, the artist puts it on a pedestal or wherever it's being exhibited, and you cannot stand beside it and explain the meaning of it. So that once you're finished, it's finished, and it has to speak for itself. So all these things, which are kind of clues to where this person is, where they're coming from. I'll give you a perfect example. Many, many years ago, I was hired by the display director at Saks Fifth Avenue to design and sculpt the figures for the Christmas windows. This is in New York City. The decision we made was to do, the theme was Little Women, which is a story, Louise May Alcott, which took place in the Civil War. And I had read that book a few times. So I knew the situation, the setting, and what was going on. It was wartime. They were going to fancy dress parties and, you know, four sisters, and they had to dress up and looking for everything they could to be presentable and, you know, feel special. So this man wanted to do the costumes in silk taffeta and organza and all of these things. And I said, wait a minute, it was Civil War. They would have worn cotton print and gingham and calico and things like that. And we did not see eye to eye. Now that, I understand why he wanted to present something. It was Christmas. He wanted to be decorative and, you know, ornate and beautiful. But to me, if you're going to do that theme, those characters, part of the authenticity is to explore how they live, where they live, and the period of time that they're living in. So that's kind of what I'm getting at, and it's different for every piece that you do, because the work I do, I you know, some of it is fantasy, some of it is they're very certain